Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
You know when you're trying to think of a song but just can't quite remember the name? Well, using weed in your teens can make you forget things you want to remember. Want proof? Check out the facts at mindovermarijuana.com. That's mindovermarijuana.com. Sponsored by the California Department of Public Health.
Happy New Year to you all, and welcome to the 2023 season of The Focus, where we bring you the most thought-provoking and informative current affairs analysis from around the world. Each episode, we invite top experts and analysts to share their insights on the most pressing issues of our time. From international relations and global economics to philosophy and diplomacy, no topic is off limits. Join us as we explore the complex and ever-changing landscape of the world, where we provide valuable perspectives on the events that shape our global community. Today, we'll be speaking with Dr. Russell Brinkworth from Flinders University right here in South Australia. Russell is Associate Professor in Autonomous Systems at the College of Science and Engineering. I met Russell last September when I was on a site visit to South Australia's nodes of defence industry for a little side project I'm working on, bringing the UK-based Massed Defence Exhibition and Conference organisation to Adelaide in 2024. Dr. Brinkworth is working on next-generation drones and is unique in his research since he is using biology as his template for drone sensors. Russell, thanks for your time and welcome to The Focus.
Thanks for having me, John.
So, Russell, can you tell our audience what type of research are you currently conducting and what sets it apart from that of your contemporaries?
The research that I'm currently conducting is looking into how we can detect things and perceive the environment rather than just record the environment, which is what currently does. So the way that technology exists at the moment is we try and capture as much data about the environment that we can. We set up multiple cameras with higher and higher resolution, streaming large amounts of data to disk that sits there and does almost nothing for 99.9% of the time. And then if there was a problem, somebody looks back, painstakingly combs through the data and decides what should have happened to prevent such a thing in the future. That's not really good for biology. That's not really good if animals acted the same way, because they would be taken out of the race pretty quickly. So animals have to actually sense and react really quickly. So when you're looking for security type applications, knowing who broke in last week is okay, but knowing that somebody's about to break in right at the point in time is much more important. So being able to analyze, interpret, predict, understand across a wide variety of environments is what I'm looking at.
It is interesting because it raises a fascinating concept, and that is that of active memory. Now, you opened up by saying, it's great that we can sort of download things onto a disk, and therefore we have a sort of, if you will, a passive memory of events. But how can you use that? If you download things onto a hard drive on the most sophisticated computer, you really can't do anything with it. But what you're actually thinking of doing is being able to use the sensors to give the platform an active memory, a sort of sense of itself in the environment. How many people around the world are actually working on this? Or is this something that you and your colleagues are kind of unique, not just in Australia, but, from a more global perspective?
There are not, I'm going to say a very large number of people, but there are a lot of people around the world, a handful of groups, who have recognized that the way that technology works today, the way that we engineer systems today, is we try and simplify them. We try to make them as simple and as repeatable and as predictable as possible. The problem with that is that the world is not simple, repeatable, and linear. Just because something is twice as strong doesn't mean you have to react twice as fast, or there are a lot of different nuances and a lot of different things that you would want to do that depend on situation rather than the stimulus itself. It might be what the history has been. It might be what the rest of the environment is doing, that you don't want to just respond to that one thing in that same way every single time. And that's why you want to incorporate memory. That's why you want to incorporate the ability to perceive the environment, not just record it. So the way to adapt to different lighting conditions might be an example, that if you're in a dark environment, you might want to turn the gain of the system up like you would in a camera. But the problem with doing that too much is that you might get blur, or you might not be able to see as things move very quickly. Or you might have an environment that's half bright and half dark. And it's the old adage of putting one foot in hot water and one foot in cold water. On average, you're okay, but no one foot is any good. So you want to adapt independently to different components of the environment, which is something that current cameras just can't do. So you're going to get a lot of shadowing and a lot of blown out areas if you try and look at a really dynamic environment with a camera. And most people have tried to take a photo of somebody standing in front of a bright window or having the sun behind them, and you just get the silhouette of the person and the background is blown out, and then nobody wins. You don't get either the great background shot that you're looking for, and you don't get the foreground of the detail that you need as well. Or you have somebody who's deliberately trying to obscure their face from a security camera, and they might wear a hoodie or something that puts a shadow over their face that makes the detection and recognition of their face much more difficult. But your eye can do that by making subtle changes across the image rather than as a whole. And that's the sort of approach that I and my colleagues are working on, building systems that dynamically adjust to different parts of the image, not just as a whole.
You raised something interesting. Say, for instance, if we look at the military environment, you're always looking at people trying to outfox the machinery, right? And generally, a lot of the machinery that we're still cranking out most of the military factories today, sophisticated though they are, and growing ever more sophisticated as time goes on, are still relatively dumb. So when it comes to, say, the other side using some form of countermeasures, whether it be electronic countermeasures to spoof a drone coming in low to hit a target, we've got the countermeasures have a really good chance of successfully repelling the drone if the countermeasures are run correctly. But what you're talking about now is a capacity for the drone to basically understand that countermeasures are going to be thrown up at it in a dynamic environment, because the kind of situational awareness you're thinking of in a battlefield is like things are whizzing around all the time. So what are you trying to do in terms of the benchmark of the sensor suite? Are you kind of giving it as much input as possible to make the best decision possible? Or is the architecture that you're working with open enough for, if the drone is operating at an AI level, it can pick and choose the best variant to perhaps counter the countermeasures being thrown at it?
Okay, so the decision on what action to take is at the limits of where I'm working at the moment. I mostly work on the sensor environment, and what I do is salience enhancement. Salience is the part of the scene that is the most important. Now, that can be a visual scene, it can be an auditory scene, it can be a radar scene, it can be any sort of sensor information. And by salience enhancement, what we do is we enhance the areas that are most salient or the most important or the most relevant. So, for example, if you wanted to do countermeasures against a camera type system, you might throw up some flares or make a bright light to try and overwhelm the system. And what my approach does is you might overwhelm a section, but you won't overwhelm the entire sensor.
Right.
So you can overwhelm a corner rather than the whole thing. Whereas currently, if you do that sort of attack, shine a laser towards a camera, for example, to blind the whole camera, you would only take out a small section of the scene, or to shine a very bright light into a camera. Again, you only take out a small part of the scene, and you can still see the rest by the dynamic adaptation that goes on within the system.
How difficult, from your experience, is it to mechanically recreate a biological system?
Well, we don't mechanically recreate the biological system. We do it in mathematical representations and equations, and we do it in algorithms, in computer software. So the mechanical construction is again, some other people deal with that. I mostly deal with the mathematical modeling of the system. And so basically we reverse engineer brains. And you might say, how do you reverse engineer a brain? And the answer is the same way you reverse engineer any other sort of electrical signal and system. You stick a probe in one end that you want to record, that's your output, and you put a stimulus in the front end, that some input that you can control and understand, and you put in a controlled input in one end and measure the response in the other end, and then you can use mathematical modeling to work out what happens in between. Now that gets really difficult to do, and it's really sophisticated work when you're looking at something as complicated as a brain, which is why working on insects and much smaller brains than humans and mammals is where we are working on, because it's a lot easier to work on something that's a lot smaller. It's also a lot less confusing from a ethical point of view. But what we're interested in is the ability for insects to do what they do, because they're really good at doing them. I mean, ask yourself, what's a fly good at doing? A fly is so good at doing the main thing that it does that we call it a fly. There is no animal we call a walk. We don't call an animal a walk, but there is an animal, there's an insect or an animal that we call a fly, because it is so good at flying. They can take off, vertical takeoff, they can hover, they can do acrobatic maneuvers at tens of Gs, they can have massive accelerations relative to their size. They can hover more stably against wind than any helicopter that we have, and they can do much more aerobatics than any sort of jet plane that we have, and they're all in the same container. They're with a brain, tiny brain, fraction of a grain of rice sort of size, using hardly any power, milliwatt and lower amounts of energy to run. So they're incredibly efficient, and they're incredibly good at what they do, and they do it with very low level sensors that are smart. What we try and do in our engineered systems is we try and over-engineer the amount of information that our sensors bring in, and then the system is overwhelmed with the amount of data that it has to sort through. And what we do is we strip that right back, and we get less data coming in, but we make better use of that data to extract more of the information that's available, more of the salience out of the environment, rather than just get as much detail as possible. So we're not looking for high resolution. We're looking for the lowest possible resolution from our camera systems that will get us the result that we need. And there are reasons for that, not just efficiency, but you can actually make use of the structure of the environment to estimate what's going on within the environment. And it works really well. And we say, why didn't we think of doing this? Because humans don't think the same way. humans think that the higher the number of pixels the camera has, the better the camera is.
Yes.
I want a 10 megapixel camera. I want a 100 megapixel camera. But it doesn't matter. Once you've got that much data, you can't sort through it in an efficient way. And it doesn't give you more information. It's the same thing about if you see a forest, or you see a tree, or you see a branch, or you see the structure within the leaf on that branch. They're all the same. It's a fractal nature. You zoom in and it looks pretty much the same. So you keep getting more and more pixels within your image. You keep getting more and more data, but you're not getting any more information. You still know that it's a forest.
I just had a peculiar thought. Bear with me here, because on our show we've interviewed a bunch of people, including Professor Avi Loeb from Harvard University, who's currently heading up this thing called the Galileo Project, in order to look for those. Well, we call them now UAPs. They're UFOs in old parlance, but I suppose I feel more comfortable calling them aerial phenomenon or unknown phenomenon. Now, in many ways, when Air Force pilots have all their sensor suites on their aircraft and they're flying out in the middle of the blue and they come across something weird, often, when people do capture a picture of an anomalous thing, it's often blurry, and people complain that we don't have cameras of the pixelation necessary to bring out the quality of what that thing is. Yeah. Now, if you were going to be producing these sort of sensors, low res sensors, but can capture a lot more stuff, would this also be useful in that sort of looking for the anomalous other thing in the sky? Because at the moment, I think Avi is putting together a battery of different sensors with his project Galileo to look for these anomalous things. And I'm sure that they're going to be high resolution, high definition images that he's after. Would he be then not using the right equipment?
I'm not going to say that one person talk about whether one person's using the right equipment or not. But what I can talk about is efficiency. Mm-hmm. Your eye has two components to it. It has a foveal vision system, where you see high resolution in color, and you get a lot of detail. But that's only 1 degree of visual space. That's like your thumbnail at arm's length. That's all you see in high resolution and color. Yep. But still, a very large proportion of your brain is devoted to trying to understand and interpret that information, because there's so much there. But you have another component as well called peripheral vision. And that's when something's moving off to the side, you catch something out the corner of your eye, it gets your attention, it's salient, and then you direct your foveal vision to that area. Right. And then you can interpret and understand. But you can't have foveal vision everywhere because it's too much information. You can't process it all. It's very inefficient. Almost everybody is working on the equivalent of foveal vision: high resolution, color, relatively low speed, but a large amount of data coming in that needs to be processed. In contrast, I work on peripheral vision, the thing that gets your attention and tells you, pay attention to this area over here. Right. And then you can direct a foveal vision system there. So instead of having tens, hundreds, thousands of cameras pointed in every single direction and trying to make sense of all of that information that comes in. And we've all seen those movies where there's a security guard sitting in front of dozens and dozens of screens, and something's going on in one screen, but there's so much that they can't possibly see what's going on, and they miss it. What I do is I build the attention-getting mechanism that says, this is the screen to pay attention to, or look over here. And then you can direct that high resolution to there. So if you're looking for something in the sky, and this is the sort of thing I've done, They weren't unknown flying vehicles. They were unmanned flying vehicles or uncrewed flying vehicles, remote control. So we knew what they were, drones. And I built a peripheral vision system that would say, this is where an object of interest is. It wouldn't say what that object of interest is. It would be blurry, but it would say, this is where to devote your attention. So instead of trying to devote your attention to everything, everywhere, all at once, might be a good movie, but it's not what we need to do in our analysis. What we need to do is focus, pay attention to the salient, the important components. And that's much more efficient. So you can get, if you wanted to record everything everywhere, you've got a certain limit of the amount of data that you can process. If you shrink your area that you're looking at, you can get more information in a smaller area. So what you do is you shrink your area of interest and then move it around according to where the salience of the image is. And then when you get a blurry thing that you don't understand, you then devote a much higher resolution to that much smaller field, and you're going to get your crisp image without having to have everything at that high resolution and just overwhelm your system.
Of course, the robotics industry has taken off in a big way. Elon Musk has said that his company Tesla will be developing a humanoid domestic robot for sale in the near term. Have you taken any inspiration from developments in the robotics industry generally, or is what you're hoping to achieve an order of magnitude more different?
What I'm trying to achieve is it would be evolutionary in terms of biology, but it's revolutionary in terms of technology. What I'm trying to do is break away from the way that technology currently works. High number of pixels, more resolution, more data in, relatively dumb sensors coming into a main central processing unit that has to take care of all of that. What I'm trying to do is make smart sensors that do some of the judgment on their own without having to burden a central unit in doing so. Just like the retina in your eye that captures that information actually starts doing processing before it sends it down the optic nerve into visual center of your brain at the back. If it had to capture everything and there's not enough bandwidth in your optic nerve to go back there for the processing. That's even taking into account the fact that you have very, very small foveal vision and the peripheral vision. If you wanted to do everything in foveal vision and not do any of the processing until it gets to the back of your brain, that's the equivalent of what we're doing at the moment. And the problem with that is that you don't do lighting normalization. You don't do the adjustment to the bright areas and the dark areas as they are. So what you can have is, say, an autonomous vehicle that's driving down the road and the sun hits the camera in such a way that it blinds it for part of it, or it hits another vehicle, say a large brightly colored truck against the sky, and the camera can't tell the difference between the truck and the sky because they're both very bright according to the camera and the rest of the scene. And the car doesn't know that there's another vehicle in the way, and you can have an accident. But my system won't be fooled by that and is not fooled by that. I have plenty of examples, a footage of examples before and after applying this processing where people running in front of the car from out of the shadows are practically invisible until they get right in front of the car and in front of the headlights. But with this system that I'm developing and that I've got examples of, I can actually see people in the shadows before they jump out in front of the car headlights. So we can actually not be fooled by the different lighting conditions. And this is completely different to the way that's currently approached and could save lives, save property, but also be less computationally intensive in the main computing units that go on into these systems.
You sound like you're trying to create instinctive sensors, basically, right? Sensors that sense at the peripheral level, there's a trigger, bang, that's where it is. Sort of instinctive as opposed to robotic, mechanical, Yeah,
that's the sort of thing I'm doing. And an analogy would be if you were building a system that needed to cross a road, and currently you stick a very high resolution camera in there and it looks down the road and it captures a very large scene at a reasonably low frame rate, maybe 25 frames a second, 30 frames a second is the maximum. But then when you want to do some processing on an embedded system, you're looking more like 10 or even 5 frames a second, depending on the resolution and the power. But yeah, reasonably low interval between frames. And then you look at the scene and then you try and analyze the entire scene. And then you try and say, right, this object, this clump of pixels here looks like a pattern that I've seen before. It looks like a Corolla that's red and it's at this angle and coming toward. By the time you do all of that, the cars hit you. What I'm doing is I'm building a system, a peripheral vision system that looks all around and doesn't just look at objects. It looks for the flow of it's called optic flow, but it's the flow of energy as objects move through the environment. And what you can do is say, there's a large clump of pixels coming towards me at speed. Get out of the way.
Yeah.
It doesn't say what that is. It doesn't say what color it is. It doesn't say the make and model of the car, if it's a truck, if it's a car, if it's a person, if it's a ball. It doesn't say what it is. It just says it's what you get out the corner of your eye when people report it as instinctively knowing to move out the way as something whizzes past them. But they don't know what it is. They just know that there's something coming towards them. That's what I'm building, is the instinct to move out the way. The automated side of it, not the computational side, not the thinking and decision-making, just the reflex, the reaction side of it. And that's the protection that you want to have in a system. To give it a sixth sense of somebody's looking at me. And what that means is you've caught something out the corner of your eye and it's triggered an alert. That's what I want our systems to have, so that they're much more instinctual, they're much more reflexive, and the good thing about this is it works really incredibly fast. I can do this at hundreds of frames a second, not at tens of frames a second. So we can react much more quickly because if there's something barreling towards you, just get out of the way and determine what it was later. Don't have to find out in minute detail exactly what it is before you react.
This is an interesting thing, because when you look at, say, robotic cars or self-driving cars, that would be your most fundamental, basic, new generation vehicle that's going to be hitting the roads soon. And when the journalists are reporting, they talk about the LiDAR, they talk about this, they talk about all kinds of, high tech that's crammed into the vehicle to prevent the vehicle from running off the road or smashing into a car or running into a family crossing the street. But no one talks about that sort of peripheral vision, which is so important to this level of technology. Obviously, you must be getting a lot of interest in terms of how to commercialize what it is that you want to put forward.
Well, not as much as I would like, but yes.
Really?
Always open to more. Yeah. But yes, it's because it's different. What I normally hear from people is, this sounds really exciting, but it's so different to what we currently do, we don't know that it will work. So what I've done in the last 10 years or so is capture as many examples of it working as I possibly can. I've got hours of video footage driving around showing how it would make autonomous vehicles safer. I've got lots of footage looking for drones flying across the sky at different levels. I mean, we're so accurate in our detection of these drones at distance now that we can't easily quantify how accurate we are. And the reason we can't do that is because we use GPS to tell us where the drone was, so that when we detect the drone, we can say, or when we think we detect the drone, we can say, this is where it is, this is where GPS says it is, how close did we get? The problem is, we're more precise than what the GPS is. So the GPS has errors in it, saying the object was around here somewhere, and we say the object was here. Did we get it right? Or did we get it wrong? We don't know, because we're more accurate than what the GPS location was. So we can say that we can extend the detection range 50%. When we're doing audio detection, we're doing detection based on the acoustic input, the sticking microphones up, or whether that's based on infrared detection, the heat of the object against the sky, or whether it's based on visual, based on the shadow that it makes against the sky. We can do all of these things, and we can say that we're 50% better, and we can quantify that, publish data that shows that we extend ranges quite a lot. But we can't say exactly how much further we can go, because we get to the point where we can still see it, but we can't guarantee that that's exactly where it was, because the thing we're benchmarking against, we're better than.
So, Russell, in order for you to sell your concept, I mean, yes, you do need to have the empirical data, the evidence, and all that kind of stuff, so people can see exactly what it is that, you're doing. But if you were to sort of sit down and you've got a blank sheet of paper in front of you and you want to start all over again, you just want to get all the old stuff out. These guys who are working on the driverless vehicles have got a particular mindset. They've been invested in their way of seeing the end product for the last 15 years, and they're not likely to change easily. What do you think you ought to be doing in order to change their thinking with regard to, embedding instinctive sensors on the vehicles to make them safer, to make them more reliable?
I wish I knew the exact answer to that, because I would be doing that exact thing. Even people that are revolutionary in their fields still are reserved about throwing everything out and starting again. And that's almost, but not quite, what I'm doing here, is because a lot of technology, and you might say if driverless cars have been working 10, 15 years, but that's built on previous work, Cameras have worked the same way for a very long time. Even digital cameras are built upon the analog film cameras, which are built upon all sorts of projection stuff. So it's built on these things, and a lot of the mathematical operations that we do. I'm a educator as well. I work at Flinders University, and I educate my students. And almost always I have to say, right, we're only going to consider these basic operations. We're only going to consider linear systems. We're only going to be considering systems that don't change over time. So the non-dynamic, the static systems that are repeatable, and you put in twice the amount of input, you get twice the amount of output. They're linear systems. But the real world doesn't work like that. And almost all of our assumptions are, okay, the real world doesn't work like that, but let's linearize it. Let's approximate it as a basic function, and then work around that. And so all of our education is built upon, let's simplify, and then solve that simple task. And you can get a long way with that. But at some point, you have to throw that whole thing out and start again and say, no, the underlying basis isn't a basic, repeatable linear system. The underlying basis is that the world is nonlinear and dynamic. And starting from that much more complicated base, you actually build systems that turn out to be more efficient because they make use of the real world. They make use of how the world actually is. Not if we try and simplify our model of the world and then build a system that works in the real world, you have to make your system much more complicated to deal with the fact that it doesn't match the model that you're using. But if you have a proper model, you have a real model of the world with all of its intricacies, you can then build a system that makes use of those dynamic nonlinearities and can actually be more efficient.
Speaking about linearities, I'm John Bruni, and you're listening to Sage International's The Focus podcast, and we're speaking with Associate Professor in Autonomous Systems at Flinders University, Russell Brinkworth. Russell, in terms of combining peripheral audio with peripheral visual, that would give you the ultimate capacity to sidestep any sort of danger, right? So if you were able to sort of think that you hear some anomalous behavior behind you, as well as have the peripheral vision, so before you get smacked in the back of the head, if you happen to be a robot walking in the wrong place, you could hear it as well as see it. Is this something that you're also working on, trying to unify both styles of periphery, if you will, in terms of sensing? Yeah. Yes,
that's something that I'm working on. We got some work on trying to hear drones, and then when we can hear them at distance, we approximate where they are in space, and then direct a camera towards that space to classify what sort of drone it actually was that made that scene. Or we have peripheral vision that gets the salience, finds where there's an important and useful part of the scene to look at, and then tells another camera that's a high resolution, small field of view to just look at that area and classify what that object was. So we do have that matching. The other thing we have, in addition to visual and acoustic, we actually do infrared as well. So heat vision. So like the Predator, you turn the heat vision on and you're able to find things in the dark. But when you combine all three, you look for the heat signature, you look for the visual signature, and you look for the acoustic signature. And in each one of these things, we have our dynamic nonlinear processing that operates differently across the scape, visual scape, the heat scape, the soundscape. And in the soundscape, you're looking across different frequencies as opposed to different points in space, but it's the same thing, different pitches, things that are either very high pitch or very low pitch. You can separate them out, just like things that are very high or low off the ground, you can separate out. So we do that, and you may or may not be able to easily camouflage a drone in one or possibly even two of those modes, but you can't do all three because the object, if you try to dampen its heat output, you would have to put extra padding on it to try and insulate it, which would make its visual footprint larger. Or you try to acoustically, you would have more heat, or you would make it more visual, and you try and make it less visually stand out, then you would have its heat signature and things. And you say, well, it's a small electric drone. What sort of heat signature would that possibly let out that you could track it? Well, we're so efficient at being able to detect anomalies that we can track a single motor that's maybe less than the size of your hand, generates has a single propeller. We can detect that just using a basic off-the-shelf camera with very low resolution, 640 by 480 camera, very low resolution, even from the 90s. It's a heat infrared camera. We can detect that at 0.5 kilometer to 1 kilometer away. and that's when it's encased in foam. So we can detect these things using very basic equipment at very long ranges. The visual detection that we can do, again, depends on the resolution of the camera you're using, but we can detect drones at several kilometers away.
Russell, I'm going to ask you a question here. I mean, are you by any chance in contact with NASA? I mean, have they taken an interest in what you're doing?
Oh, no, I haven't actually approached NASA, but I have actually looked at whether we can find astronomical objects that are very low contrast and enhance them. I've had a look at some of that data, but I haven't been concentrating on that very much. Also, medical images, being able to detect very small anomalies amongst clutter of the human body. Yes. That's the sort of thing that I'm starting to look at. The ability to analyze brain waves and interpret them in a different sort of way than what we currently have. What we currently do is very basic sort of analysis, is split them into fast and slow waves, alpha, beta, gamma waves, and some of your audience might have heard of those different sort of EEG or brain waves. But being able to interpret them and enhance them and extract out the information that's buried within that pool of data is something that I'm really interested in for human-machine interfaces. My background's in neuroscience, so I'm really interested in being able to reverse engineer not just brains, but the activity of an ensemble of neurons rather than just a single brain cell or neuron, which is what I currently do one at a time to build up a brain. But when you're talking about recording from human brains, we don't measure from one neuron at a time, we measure from groups of them at a time. And trying to make sense of that cacophony that comes in is another challenge again, but very interested in it.
The reason why I raised NASA is I made a couple of notes while I was listening to you speak about optical flow and all this kind of thing. Now, in the mediums that you have to operate with, arguably air and water, if you're working on drones that operate in water, you're going to be, you should be theoretically able to create machinery that can operate in any particular medium of gas or liquid state, basically. So you could have like a drone traveling through the methane lakes of Titan, but with all that peripheral stuff going on and the sensors being tweaked to that specific environment. So it's not a matter of just going there with a drone, whether it be a submersible drone or a flying drone, and you've got your stock standard cameras and listening devices, which don't have that sort of intuitive capacity to act on the spot, to see something different, especially when the probe is, say, on Mars or on Titan, which is a long distance away, and you really have to depend on that probe to think and act for itself because of the time lag, you know, with regard to communications. That is fascinating. That's why I'm thinking, wow, you know, I mean, I can see that application in space and space exploration. I mean, not just looking at the stars, but I'm talking about when we go to, you know, throughout the solar system onto different planetary environments. You know, you've got all of those things that can actually really make the probes, the next generation probes, so much more efficient and effective. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to be involved in some sort of mission to the seas of Europa or something like that, where you want a system that can react or that can in real time look where the salients, look where the important parts of the scene are and detect that and react accordingly, rather than just passively bring all the information in and then try and send it back for somebody else to look at, or whether or even an embedded system would be very limited in what you could actually do in real time on those sorts of situations. You'd mostly just be passively observing. And the problem you would have is navigation in those sorts of environments. I mean, it's not as bad in Mars because there's no liquid water on the surface of Mars, and so nothing's really moving. There's not really a dynamics but it just means it's incredibly slow to do anything. And you have to rely on people to look around and say, oh, there's an important thing over there. Let's go to there and spend another couple of days or weeks, rather than just in real time being able to find the important components and react accordingly. But it's going to be much more important when we want to go into some liquid medium in another planetary body that's going to require much faster reaction times.
Russell, thank you very much for being with us on The Focus today. Flinders University Associate Professor in Autonomous Systems, College of Science and Engineering, Russell Brinkworth.
Thank you very much, John.
And thank you for tuning in to the Focus podcast. We hope that you found today's discussion to be enlightening and thought-provoking. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to reach out to us on social media or via email. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite platform. Join us again next time as we continue to delve into the more pressing current affairs issues of our time. Until then, stay informed and stay engaged. I'm John Bruni, and you've been listening to The Focus.
Earth Justice is a national legal nonprofit defending the environment and people's health. Until justice stands for all, our lawyers will never rest. More at earthjustice.org/neverrest. Earth Justice, because the earth needs a good lawyer.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.